He was just a quiet single dad running a small bookshop in the heart of Seattle, invisible to everyone who passed by his dusty shelves and faded awnings. No one knew his past. No one expected what he'd do next. But when 5 men cornered a billionaire CEO in a dark alley just steps from his store, everything changed. What happened in those 3 minutes would expose hidden skills no bookstore owner should have. Uncover a web of corporate betrayal that reached the highest levels of power, and spark a connection between 2 people from completely different worlds. This isn't just a rescue story. It's about courage born from quiet strength, trust built in the shadow of danger, and the unexpected power of a man who walked away from his former life, but runs straight into the fire when someone needs protecting. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning Seattle's streets into rivers of reflected neon and shadow. The kind of rain that made people walk faster, heads down, umbrellas tilted against the wind like shields. It was the kind of night when most businesses locked their doors early and smart people stayed inside. But Jordan Pierce wasn't most people. He stood behind the counter of Chapter and Verse, a narrow bookshop wedged between a Vietnamese restaurant and a closed-down law office on Pike Street. The shop smelled like old paper, coffee, and the faint ghost of pipe tobacco from the previous owner. Overhead, a single brass lamp cast warm light across stacks of worn paperbacks and leather-bound classics that no one seemed to buy anymore. Jordan was tall, lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and a face that looked like it had seen more than it should. He wore a faded flannel shirt, jeans with paint stains on the knees, and reading glasses that made him look softer than he actually was. To the handful of regulars who came in for mystery novels or travel memoirs, he was polite, knowledgeable, and forgettable. Just another bookshop owner trying to survive in a city that increasingly had no room for places like his. But if anyone had looked closer, they might have noticed the way his eyes tracked movement on the street outside, the way his shoulders never fully relaxed, the way he always kept his back to the wall and his exit routes clear. Old habits didn't die. They just went quiet. From the back room came the sound of humming, light and off-key. A moment later, a young girl emerged carrying a stack of books nearly as tall as she was. Her name was Sophie, 8 years old, with wild curls pulled into 2 lopsided ponytails and a gap-toothed smile that could disarm anyone. She dropped the books onto the counter with a theatrical groan. "Dad, why do people buy so many boring books about money?" Jordan glanced at the stack. Business management, investment strategies, leadership guides. All ordered by the same customer, a regular who came in once a month and never made eye contact. "Not everyone finds them boring," Jordan said, sorting through the titles. "Some people think money is the most interesting thing in the world." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "That's sad." He smiled. "Maybe, but it pays for your art supplies." She considered this, then shrugged. "Fair." Jordan checked the time. Almost 9. The customer was late, which wasn't unusual. He glanced out the window at the rain-slicked street. A few people hurried past, collars turned up, faces hidden. A taxi splashed through a puddle. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Then he saw her. She appeared at the far end of the block, walking quickly but not running. Even from a distance, she stood out. Tailored black coat, heels that clicked against the wet pavement, an elegance that didn't quite fit the neighborhood. Her face was partially obscured by an umbrella, but Jordan caught a glimpse of sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled back tight. She moved like someone used to being in control. But there was something else in her posture. Tension. Awareness. The kind that came from knowing you were being followed. Jordan straightened slightly, behind her. 5 men emerged from the shadows near the old theater. They moved in a loose formation, not close enough to be obvious, but coordinated, practiced. 1 crossed to the opposite sidewalk. 2 stayed back. 2 moved ahead to cut off the street. Jordan's jaw tightened. Sophie looked up from the book she'd been flipping through. "Dad, you okay?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the scene unfolding outside. The woman had noticed them now. She walked faster, glancing over her shoulder. Her umbrella tilted, and for just a moment, Jordan saw her face clearly. Recognition hit him like a punch. Victoria Caldwell. He'd seen her on the news, in magazines, on the cover of Forbes. She was the CEO of Apex Innovations, a tech giant that had revolutionized cloud security and data encryption. At 39, she was one of the most powerful women in the country. Brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. And right now, she was being hunted. The 5 men were closing in. The woman turned sharply into the alley beside Jordan's shop, the narrow passage that led to the back parking lot. It was a dead end. She probably didn't know that, but they did. Jordan moved without thinking. He reached under the counter and pulled out a worn jacket, dark green with reinforced stitching along the seams. It wasn't the kind of jacket a bookshop owner needed, but it was the kind a man with a different past kept close. "Sophie," he said quietly, his tone shifting into something she recognized immediately. "Back room, now." Her eyes went wide, but she didn't argue. She'd heard that voice before. The one that meant something was wrong. The one that meant her dad wasn't just her dad. Any more dots, she slipped off the stool and disappeared into the back without a sound. Jordan locked the register, turned off the main lights, and moved toward the door. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing controlled. Muscle memory took over, the kind that came from years of training he'd tried to forget. He stepped out into the rain. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for a delivery truck. Dumpsters lined one side. Fire escapes clung to the brick walls above. The rain turned everything into a slick, dark maze of metal and stone. Victoria Caldwell stood at the far end, her back to the wall, umbrella discarded at her feet. Her coat was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She held her phone in one hand, but the screen was dark. No signal. Or maybe they jammed it. The 5 men spread out in a semicircle, blocking the exit. They weren't street thugs. Their clothes were too clean, their movements too disciplined. Corporate muscle. The kind hired to intimidate, extract, or disappear someone quietly. The tallest one stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, shaved head, a scar running through his left eyebrow. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "You've been hard to reach." Victoria's chin lifted. "I don't take meetings in alleys." "This isn't a meeting," the man replied. "This is a retrieval. I'm not going anywhere with you. That's not your choice anymore." Jordan moved into the alley, his footsteps barely audible over the rain. He didn't announce himself, didn't shout or threaten. He just walked forward, hands loose at his sides, posture relaxed but ready. One of the men noticed him first. He turned, frowning. "Hey, this is private. Move along." Jordan stopped about 10 feet away. His eyes flicked over each of them, reading posture, weight distribution, where their hands were. 2 had concealed weapons. 1 carried himself like former military. The leader was confident but inexperienced in real combat. "She said she's not going," Jordan said quietly. The leader turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to amusement. "And who are you? The neighborhood watch? Just someone who doesn't like bullies." The man laughed. "You picked the wrong night to be a hero, friend." Jordan didn't respond. He just stood there, still and calm, rain dripping from his hair. Victoria stared at him, confusion flickering across her face. She didn't know him. Didn't understand why a stranger would step into this. But something in his eyes, the quiet certainty there, made her heart beat just a little faster. The leader sighed. Last chance. Walk away. Jordan tilted his head slightly. You first. The man's smile faded. He nodded to the two nearest him. Move him. They came fast, confident. The first one reached for Jordan's shoulder. Jordan shifted his weight, redirected the grab, and used the man's momentum to spin him into the wall. The impact was quick, controlled. The man slumped, dazed. The second one swung a fist. Jordan ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and drove an elbow into his ribs. The man gasped and dropped to one knee. It happened in seconds. No wasted movement. No hesitation. The remaining three men froze, suddenly realizing this wasn't some random bystander. Victoria's eyes widened. Jordan looked at the leader. Last chance, he said softly. Walk away. The man's hand moved toward his jacket. And that's when everything changed. 15 minutes earlier. The world had been simpler. Jordan Pierce had been standing in the back room of Chapter and Verse, stacking boxes of new arrivals that had finally come in after weeks of delays. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, coloring in a notebook she'd decorated with stickers of stars and dragons. The radio played softly in the corner, some old jazz station that made the rain outside feel almost cozy. Asterisk. Feel almost cozy. Asterisk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was his life now. Quiet, predictable, safe. It hadn't always been that way. Jordan had spent 12 years in a world most people never saw. Not military, though people often assumed that when they caught a glimpse of the discipline in his movements, or the way he assessed every room he entered. No, Jordan had worked in private security, the kind that didn't advertise and didn't ask questions. Corporate protection. High-risk extraction. Asset recovery. The jobs that required someone who could think fast, move faster, and disappear when it was over. He'd been good at it. Too good, but that life had cost him things he couldn't get back. A marriage that crumbled under the weight of secrets and long absences. Trust that eroded with every lie he told to keep his work hidden. And finally, the moment that changed everything. A job in Prague that went sideways, a client who didn't make it out, and the realization that he'd become someone he didn't recognize anymore. So he'd walked away. Cashed out his savings, moved to Seattle, and bought a failing bookshop from an old man who just wanted to retire. He'd told himself it was temporary, just until he figured out what came next. That was 3 years ago. Sophie had been 5 then, angry and confused about why Mommy didn't live with them anymore. She didn't understand why they'd left their old apartment in San Francisco, why Daddy didn't go to work in suits anymore, why everything had changed so fast. But slowly, the bookshop had become home. The rhythm of opening the store each morning, brewing coffee, organizing shelves, recommending books to the handful of customers who still valued paper over screens. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't dangerous. But it was real. And for the first time in years, Jordan could breathe. Sophie had blossomed here. She'd made friends at the public school down the street. She'd started drawing again, filling notebooks with fantastical creatures and sprawling landscapes. She laughed more, slept better, stopped asking when Mommy was coming back. Jordan had learned to cook. Badly at first, then gradually better. He'd learned to braid hair, though Sophie's curls still defeated him most mornings. He'd learned to sit through parent-teacher conferences and school plays without checking his phone. Every 30 seconds, he'd learned to be a father instead of a ghost. The bookshop barely broke even most months. Rent was high, foot traffic was low, and online retailers made it almost impossible to compete. But Jordan didn't need much. Just enough to keep the lights on, feed his daughter, and maintain the illusion of normalcy. because that's what it was. An illusion. He still woke up some nights in a cold sweat, his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there anymore. He still scanned every face that came through the door, looking for threats that never materialized. He still kept a go-bag hidden in the apartment upstairs, just in case they ever needed to disappear fast. Old habits didn't die. They just learned to hide. On the shelves of chapter and verse, Jordan kept books about philosophy, poetry, travel, history. Stories about people reinventing themselves, finding peace, building something new from the wreckage of what came before. He told himself he stocked them for customers, but really, they were for him. Sophie looked up from her coloring. "Dad, do you think dragons were real?" Jordan smiled. "What do you think?" She considered this seriously. "I think maybe they were, but they looked different than in stories. Like maybe they were just big lizards that people made up stories about. That's a pretty smart theory." "Or," she added, eyes brightening, "maybe they're still real, but they learned to hide really well." Jordan's smile softened. "Like camouflage?" "Yeah, like they're still out there, but nobody notices because they look like normal things now." He knelt down beside her, looking at her drawing. A dragon curled around a mountain, wings spread wide, eyes gentle despite the fierce claws and scales. "I like that idea," he said quietly. "That something powerful can choose to be quiet instead." Sophie beamed at him, then went back to coloring. Jordan stood and returned to his boxes, but her words stayed with him. Something powerful choosing to be quiet. That's what he'd tried to become. But he wondered sometimes if it was really a choice or just a different kind of hiding. The bell above the shop door chimed. Jordan glanced at his watch. 9:15. Late for a casual browser. He walked out to the front. A woman stood just inside the door, shaking rain from her umbrella. She wore an expensive-looking coat and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from boardrooms and executive decisions. "We're about to close," Jordan said politely, "but you're welcome to look around for a few minutes." The woman glanced up, and Jordan saw her face clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, striking features, dark, intelligent eyes that took in the entire shop in seconds. She looked tired. Not physically, but the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long. "I'm looking for business books," she said. "Strategy, leadership, that sort of thing." Jordan nodded. "Back corner, left side. Let me know if you need help finding anything specific." She moved past him without another word, heels clicking on the worn wooden floor. Jordan watched her for a moment, something nagging at the back of his mind. He'd seen her before. Not in person, but somewhere. Then it clicked. Victoria Caldwell. Apex Innovations. He'd read an article about her a few months ago, something about a hostile takeover attempt she'd fought off. The article had called her brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. What was someone like her doing in a neighborhood bookshop at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night? Jordan returned to the counter, but kept her in his peripheral vision. She moved through the shelves with purpose, pulling books, checking titles, moving on. But there was something off about her movements. She kept glancing toward the window, checking her phone. Her shoulders were tense. Sophie emerged from the back room. "Is that lady buying the boring books?" "Maybe," Jordan said quietly. "Why don't you finish up your homework upstairs?" "I'll be up in a few minutes." Sophie looked at him, then at the woman, then back at her father. She'd learned to read his moods better than most adults. "Okay," she said. Then quieter, "Be careful." Jordan's chest tightened. 8 years old, and she already knew. Already understood that sometimes the world wasn't safe, that sometimes her dad had to be someone different. He kissed the top of her head. "Always an M." She disappeared up the narrow staircase that led to their apartment above the shop. Jordan turned back toward Victoria Caldwell just as she approached the counter with 3 books. Her hands were steady, but her eyes kept darting to the street outside. Find everything okay? Jordan asked. Yes, thank you. Her voice was controlled, professional, but he heard the edge underneath. He rang up the books. That'll be $42.50. She handed him her card without looking at the total. As Jordan processed the payment, he casually glanced out the window. That's when he saw them. 5 men, spread across the street, moving with coordinated purpose. They weren't looking at the bookshop yet, but they were searching, hunting. Jordan's hand paused over the register. Victoria noticed. Is something wrong? He looked at her directly. Those men outside. Are they looking for you? Her face went carefully blank. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Jordan's voice was quiet but certain. And you came in here hoping they'd pass by. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then her shoulders dropped, just slightly, the mask cracking. I thought I'd lost them 6 blocks ago, she said softly. Jordan nodded. He looked at the men again. They'd split up now, checking doorways, peering into windows. There's a back exit, he said. Through the storage room. It leads to the parking lot behind the building. Victoria's eyes met his. Why are you helping me? Jordan didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the memory of all the times he'd wished someone had helped him when things went wrong. Maybe it was just that Sophie's question echoed in his head. Do dragons hide, or do they choose when to be seen? Because you need it, he said simply. She studied him for a moment. This stranger in a bookshop who somehow understood danger when he saw it. Then she nodded double quotes, thank you. Jordan led her toward the back. But before they reached the storage room, the front door opened. One of the men stepped inside. Rain dripped from his jacket. His eyes locked onto Victoria immediately. Miss Caldwell, he said pleasantly. We've been looking for you. Jordan stepped between them. Shop's closed. The man's smile didn't waver. This doesn't concern you. She's a customer, Jordan said. That makes it my concern. The man's expression hardened. Step aside. Jordan didn't move. Outside, the other 4 men appeared at the window. They were out of time. Victoria's hand found Jordan's arm. You don't have to do this. Jordan looked back at her. In that moment, he made a choice. Not between safety and danger, but between who he'd been trying to become and who he'd always been underneath. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. The moment stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Ready to snap. Jordan stood between Victoria Caldwell and the man blocking the front door. Rain hammered against the windows. The overhead light hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed and went silent. The man's hand moved slowly toward the inside of his jacket. Not a threat yet, but a promise of one. Last chance, he said. Walk away. Chance, he said. Walk away. Jordan's mind calculated distances, angles, exit routes. 5 men total. 1 inside, 4 outside. The front door was compromised. The back exit led to the parking lot, but they'd have someone covering it by now. The staircase to the apartment was 15 feet away, but Sophie was up there. He couldn't lead danger to his daughter. That left only one option. Control the situation before it escalated. Sophie, Jordan called out, his voice calm and measured. Lock the apartment door. Don't open it for anyone but me. From upstairs came the immediate sound of footsteps, then the solid click of a deadbolt sliding into place. His daughter knew the drill. They'd practiced it, though he'd always told her it was just a game. Just pretend, but it had never been pretend. The man at the door frowned. You have a kid up there? That's why you're going to leave quietly, Jordan said. The man laughed, a short bark of amusement. You think having a kid makes you scary? Makes me want to back off? No, Jordan replied. It makes me more dangerous than you can imagine. Something in his tone made the man pause. Made him look at Jordan differently, seeing past the flannel shirt and reading glasses to something harder underneath. Victoria stepped forward. her voice sharp. "This is between me and them. Let me handle it." Jordan didn't take his eyes off the man. "What do they want?" "Information," Victoria said. "Access codes. Encryption keys. Things I'm not giving them. Who sent them?" She hesitated. "Someone I used to trust." The man at the door pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. A moment later, Jordan heard footsteps in the alley beside the shop. The back exit was covered now. They were boxed in. "Miss Caldwell," the man said, pocketing his phone. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We just want to talk." "In an alley," Victoria said coldly. "With 5 men. That's not talking. That's intimidation. Call it what you want. You're coming with us." Jordan shifted his weight slightly, a subtle movement that put him at a better angle. "She already told you no." The man's patience finally cracked. "And who the hell are you? Some bookstore owner playing hero? You think you can stop 5 of us?" "I think," Jordan said quietly, "you should consider what kind of bookstore owner knows how to read tactical formations and predicts ambush patterns." The man's eyes narrowed. "What? You split your team wrong," Jordan continued, his voice almost conversational. 2 in front, 2 in back, 1 inside. Classic box formation. But you left your strongest guy at the front door, where he can't support either flank. Your back team is probably watching the parking lot, which means they can't see the alley entrance from 7th Street. And you're all wearing earpieces with a 2-second delay, which means you're using cheap commercial gear, not military grade. The man's hand moved fully to his weapon now. "How do you know that?" Jordan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I used to do what you do. And I was better at it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. Victoria looked at Jordan with new understanding. This wasn't just some kind stranger. This was someone with training, experience, capability she'd completely underestimated. "Who are you?" she asked. Jordan didn't answer. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out his phone. He held it up, showing the screen. On it was a photo of the 5 men taken from the shop's security camera just moments ago. "I've already sent this to someone," Jordan said calmly. "Former colleague. If I don't check in within 10 minutes, this photo goes to Seattle PD, the FBI, and every news outlet in the city. You'll be identified, tracked, and arrested before morning." It was a bluff. Jordan didn't have any former colleagues he stayed in touch with. The photo existed, but it wasn't going anywhere except his own cloud storage. But the man didn't know that. His jaw clenched. "You're playing a dangerous game." "No," Jordan said. "You are." The man's earpiece crackled. He listened, his expression darkening, then spoke quietly into his collar mic. "Copy, stand by." He looked back at Jordan and Victoria. "My employer wants to speak with Miss Caldwell directly. No intermediaries. No violence. Just a conversation." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Your employer already made their position clear when they sent 5 men to corner me in an alley." "Plans changed," the man said. "You declined the polite approach. This is the direct one." Jordan stepped forward, closing the distance between them by half. "Here's a direct approach. You leave, now, all 5 of you. And Miss Caldwell stays here until she feels safe enough to walk out on her own terms." The man's hand tightened on his concealed weapon. Jordan saw it, read the intent, and shifted his stance imperceptibly. If the man drew, Jordan would move left, use the counter as cover, grab the heavy bookend shaped like a lion, and close the distance before he could aim properly. He'd done it before. Different city, different circumstances, but the muscle memory was still there. The man must have seen something in Jordan's eyes, some flicker of readiness that made him reconsider. His hand moved away from his jacket. "This isn't over," he said. "It is for tonight," Jordan replied. The man stared at him for another long moment, then turned and walked out. The door chimed as it closed behind him. Through the window, Jordan watched the 5 men regroup on the street, talking quickly, gesturing toward the shop. Then, one by one, they disappeared into the rain, but Jordan knew they weren't gone. Just repositioned. He turned to Victoria. She stood with her arms crossed, her expensive coat dripping water onto his worn wooden floor, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jordan moved to the window and pulled down the shade. "Don't thank me yet. They'll be back." "How do you know?" "Because they were professionals. And professionals don't give up after one refusal. They regroup, adjust strategy, and try again." Victoria sank into the reading chair near the counter, suddenly looking exhausted. "I should call the police." "And tell them what?" 5 men followed you, but didn't technically do anything illegal. They'll take a report and do nothing." She knew he was right. Her hand went to her phone, then dropped. "So what do we do?" Jordan studied her. Victoria Caldwell, billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful people in the tech industry, sitting in his bookshop looking lost. It didn't match the image from magazine covers and conference stages. "Tell me why they're after you," Jordan said. Victoria looked up. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse, retreat behind the corporate armor she wore so well. But something in her gaze shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that she'd run out of options. Or maybe it was the fact that this stranger had stood between her and danger, without asking for anything in return. 3 weeks ago, she began slowly. My company was approached by a venture capital firm, Titan Holdings. They wanted to acquire Apex Innovations. I declined. Politely at first, then more firmly when they kept pushing. "And they didn't like being told no," Jordan said. "It's more complicated than that. Titan Holdings is connected to Marcus Devereaux, my former business partner. We founded Apex together 7 years ago. He wanted to monetize our security protocols by selling them to the highest bidder, regardless of who that bidder was. I refused. We had a legal battle. I won controlling interest. He was forced out." Jordan leaned against the counter. "And now he wants back in." "He wants revenge," Victoria corrected. "The acquisition isn't about business. It's personal. If Titan gets control of Apex, they'll gut everything I've built. Sell off the technology to foreign governments, defense contractors, anyone willing to pay. Technology that was designed to protect people will be weaponized. So those men tonight? They want my access codes, my biometric credentials. With those, they could trigger a hostile takeover from the inside, override board decisions, lock me out of my own company." Jordan processed this. Why not go public? Expose what they're doing? Victoria's smile was bitter. Because Marcus is careful. Everything he does is technically legal. Gray market, but legal. If I accuse him without proof, I look paranoid. If I fight too hard, I look unstable. The board is already questioning my judgment. Some of them think I should take the acquisition deal and walk away rich, but you won't. No, because this isn't about money. It's about keeping dangerous technology out of dangerous hands. Jordan looked at her with new respect. She could have sold out, taken the payout, retired to some private island. Instead, she was standing in a bookshop, soaked and exhausted, refusing to give up. "You're not what I expected," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" "Someone colder. More calculating." "I am calculating," she said with a slight smile. "I just calculate differently than most people think." From upstairs came a soft knock. 3 quick taps, then 2. Sophie's signal asking if it was safe. Jordan walked to the base of the stairs. "All clear, sweetheart. You can come down." Sophie appeared at the top, her face serious. "Are the bad men gone?" "For now." She descended slowly, clutching her notebook. When she reached the bottom, she looked at Victoria with open curiosity. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked. Victoria blinked, surprised by the directness. "I'm getting there." Sophie studied her with the unnervingly perceptive gaze only young people seem to possess. Then she walked over and held out her notebook. "I drew you something," she said. Victoria took it carefully. On the page was a drawing of a woman in a cape standing on top of a building, arms spread wide, stars surrounding her. Arms spread wide, stars surrounding her. "That's you," Sophie explained. "Dad says heroes don't always look like the pictures in movies. Sometimes they look normal. But they're still heroes." Victoria's throat tightened. She looked at Jordan, who gave a small shrug. "She draws what she feels," he said simply. Victoria looked back at the drawing, then at Sophie. "Thank you. This is beautiful." Sophie beamed, then turned to her father. "Can she stay for dinner? We have soup." Jordan opened his mouth to decline politely, but Victoria spoke first. "I'd like that," she said softly. "If it's not too much trouble." Jordan looked at her, this powerful woman asking permission to share canned soup in a cramped apartment above a failing bookshop. And something shifted in his chest, some long-dormant instinct that recognized not danger, but connection. "Soup it is," he said. As they moved toward the stairs. Victoria paused and looked back at the darkened shop windows. "They're still out there, aren't they?" she asked. Jordan nodded. "Watching, waiting. And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Jordan said quietly, "we figure out how to end this without anyone getting hurt." Victoria met his eyes. "Is that possible?" Jordan thought about his old life, the jobs that went wrong, the people who didn't make it home. Then he thought about Sophie's drawing, about the choice to be something different. "It has to be," he said. The apartment above chapter and verse was small but lived in. Mismatched furniture that Jordan had picked up from thrift stores, bookshelves overflowing with novels and textbooks, Sophie's artwork taped to every available wall. The kitchen was barely large enough for two people to stand in. But somehow all three of them managed. Jordan heated the soup while Sophie set the table with exaggerated care, making sure the napkins were perfectly aligned. Victoria sat at the small wooden table, looking oddly out of place in her designer coat among the clutter of normal life. She watched. Jordan moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. The way he checked the locks on the windows without seeming to. The way he positioned himself so he could see both the apartment door and the street below. Small tells that revealed training most people would never notice. "How long were you in security?" Victoria asked. Jordan glanced at her while stirring the soup. 12 years, corporate protection? Among other things, and you gave it up for this?" She gestured at the modest apartment. Jordan looked at Sophie, who was now drawing at the table. "I gave it up for her." Victoria understood. Some things mattered more than money or prestige or the rush of danger. She'd built an empire. But what did she have to show for it besides late nights, constant threats, and the kind of loneliness that came from always being the smartest person in the room? They ate soup and crackers, while rain continued to drum against the windows. Sophie talked about her school project on ocean animals, enthusiastically explaining the difference between dolphins and porpoises. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Sophie light up even more. Jordan watched them interact, something warm settling in his chest. When was the last time Sophie had talked to another adult like this? When was the last time he'd let anyone into their small, carefully protected world? After dinner, Sophie yawned dramatically. Jordan checked his watch. "Almost 10. Bedtime, kiddo." "But we have a guest," Sophie protested. "Who will still be here in the morning?" Jordan said gently. Sophie looked at Victoria. "You're staying?" Victoria glanced at Jordan, uncertain. He nodded slightly. "If that's okay," Victoria said. Those men outside make it complicated for me to leave safely. Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer. She hugged her father, then surprised Victoria by hugging her too. "Good night, Cape Lady," Sophie whispered. After Sophie disappeared into her bedroom, the apartment felt quieter. Jordan cleared the dishes while Victoria stood at the window, looking down at the street below. "Do you see them?" Jordan asked. "Black sedan, half a block down. Someone's sitting in the driver's seat." "Good eye." "There's another one watching the back alley from the coffee shop across the street." Victoria turned. "You already knew they were there. I counted positions before we came upstairs." Jordan dried his hands on a towel. "They're running a standard surveillance pattern. Watching exits, logging who comes and goes, waiting for orders." "Orders from Marcus," Victoria said bitterly. Jordan moved to the window beside her. "Tell me about him. Not the business history. The personal part." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "We met in grad school, MIT. Both of us were broke, ambitious, convinced we'd change the world. We started Apex in his garage with maxed out credit cards and no idea what we were doing." She smiled sadly. "For the first 3 years, we were unstoppable. Perfect partnership. He handled investors and expansion while I focused on development and security architecture. What changed? Money changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he'd always been." Victoria crossed her arms. "Once we got serious funding, once the company valuation hit 9 figures, he started making decisions without consulting me. Deals with questionable clients. Partnerships that compromised our security protocols. When I pushed back, he told me I was being naive. That business required moral flexibility, and you disagreed. I built Apex to protect people, not exploit them. When I found out he'd been secretly negotiating to sell our encryption technology to a defense contractor with known human rights violations, I threatened to go public. He tried to force me out. We ended up in court. I won, but barely." Jordan studied her profile in the dim light. "He sounds like someone who doesn't handle losing well. Marcus keeps score. Every slight, every defeat gets added to a ledger in his mind. This isn't just about the company anymore. It's about proving he was right and I was wrong." "And the men downstairs?" "Probably hired through one of his shell companies, deniable, untraceable back to him directly." Victoria turned from the window. "I've dealt with corporate espionage before, hostile competitors, even foreign intelligence services trying to steal our technology. But this feels different. More personal. More dangerous." Jordan nodded slowly. He'd seen this pattern before in his old life. When business became personal, when egos got involved, that's when situations turned unpredictable. Dangerous. "We need to change the dynamic," Jordan said. "Right now, they're controlling the situation. They know where you are. They're dictating terms, and you're reacting. We need to flip that. How?" Jordan moved to a desk in the corner and pulled out a notepad. He began sketching the block, marking positions, sight lines, potential approaches. "First, we need to understand their resources. How many people are they willing to commit? What's their timeline? Are they authorized to use force or just intimidation?" Victoria watched him work, seeing the tactical mind underneath the bookshop owner facade. "You're not just thinking about tonight, are you?" "No, tonight is containment. Tomorrow is when we go on offense. What does that mean?" Jordan looked up from his sketching. "It means we stop hiding and start gathering intelligence. We figure out who hired them, what they really want, and how to make it cost more than it's worth to keep coming after you." Victoria felt something shift inside her. For weeks, she'd been running, hiding, trying to outmaneuver threats while maintaining her company's public image. It was exhausting, demoralizing. But this man, this stranger who owed her nothing, was talking about fighting back. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. You could have let me walk out of your shop tonight. Stayed uninvolved, safe. Jordan set down his pen. Because I spent 12 years doing jobs I'm not proud of for people who didn't deserve my loyalty. And when it mattered most, when I needed help, there was no one. He looked at her directly. I don't want to be the person who walks away anymore. Victoria's throat tightened. She'd built walls around herself for so long, convinced that showing vulnerability was weakness. But standing in this modest apartment with this quiet, capable man, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. What do we do first? She asked. Jordan smiled slightly. First, you get some rest. Take Sophie's room. She can sleep in mine tonight. I can't take her room. You need sleep more than you need pride right now, Jordan said firmly. Tomorrow we'll need you sharp. Victoria wanted to argue, but exhaustion was finally catching up with her. The adrenaline that had kept her moving for hours was fading, leaving only bone-deep weariness. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. Jordan nodded. Lock the door. If anything happens, anything at all, don't try to be a hero. Just yell. As Victoria disappeared into Sophie's room, Jordan moved back to the window. The black sedan was still there. Still watching. He pulled out his phone and began making calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Former colleagues, information brokers, anyone who might have insight into Marcus Devereaux's current operations. By midnight, he had 3 names, 2 possible locations, and one very interesting piece of information about a warehouse. Shipment scheduled for tomorrow night. Jordan looked down at his notes, then at the darkened street below. The men watching his shop had no idea what was coming. They thought they were hunting a cornered executive and a nobody, bookstore owner. They were wrong about both. Morning came gray and cold. Jordan woke at 5:30, his body still trained to old rhythms despite 3 years of civilian life. He checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, then moved quietly through the apartment. Victoria was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 empty coffee cups beside her. She'd changed out of her soaked clothes into a spare shirt and sweatpants Jordan had left outside her door. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without the corporate armor of expensive clothes and perfect makeup, she looked younger. More human. You're up early, Jordan said. Couldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline. She gestured at her laptop. I've been reviewing security footage from Apex, trying to identify when they started surveilling me. Jordan poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Find anything? 3 weeks. They've been following me for 3 weeks. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. Different teams, rotating schedules, but always present. I thought I was being paranoid. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. Jordan studied the footage over her shoulder. Professional work. The kind that costs serious money. Your former partner has deep pockets, Jordan observed. Marcus has investors now. People who see Apex as an acquisition target worth whatever it takes. Victoria closed the laptop. I've been thinking about what you said last night. About going on offense. What exactly did you have in mind? Jordan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he'd received at 2 in the morning. A warehouse in the industrial district south of downtown. Nondescript, but the metadata attached to the image told a different story. This building is leased by a shell company that traces back to one of Marcus's known associates. According to my source, there's a shipment arriving tonight. High-value cargo, heavy security. Victoria's eyes sharpened. What kind of cargo? Electronic equipment. Specialized servers, networking hardware. The kind of infrastructure you'd need if you were planning to clone an existing security system. Understanding dawned on Victoria's face. They're building a duplicate of Apex's network. If they can mirror our systems, they could run penetration tests, find vulnerabilities, exploit them before we even know there's a breach. That's my guess. We need to stop that shipment. Jordan shook his head. We need to document it. Get evidence that ties Marcus directly to corporate espionage. Right now, it's all circumstantial. You need proof. Victoria leaned back, processing. You want to surveil the warehouse. I want to get inside, Jordan corrected. Photograph the equipment, identify the buyers, trace the money. Build a case that even Marcus's lawyers can't dismiss. That's illegal entry. Breaking and entering. Only if we get caught. Victoria stared at him. You're serious. You said you needed proof. This is how we get it. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing options. Everything about this went against her instinct for careful legal approaches. But careful and legal had gotten her cornered in an alley, running for her life. I'm coming with you, Victoria said. No, too dangerous. It's my company. My fight. Jordan's jaw tightened. You're the target. If something goes wrong, you being there makes everything worse. And if something goes wrong, you being there alone means no one knows what happened to you. Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by letting other people take all the risks. We do this together, or not at all. They stared at each other across the small kitchen table. Jordan recognized that look. The same stubborn determination he'd seen in operators who refused to be left behind on missions. The kind of person who'd rather die fighting than live wondering what if. He exhaled slowly. Fine, but you follow my lead. No arguments, no hesitation. If I say run, you run. Agreed? Agreed. Sophie emerged from Jordan's bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She looked at the two of them sitting close together over coffee and maps, and smiled sleepily. Are you planning an adventure? She asked. Jordan exchanged a glance with Victoria. Something like that, sweetheart. Can I come? Not this time. But I need you to do something very important for me. Sophie straightened, suddenly serious. What? Mrs. Chun downstairs has been asking about having you over for dumplings. I'm going to call her and arrange for you to spend the evening there. Can you be on your best behavior? Sophie nodded solemnly. Mrs. Chun was the elderly woman who ran the Vietnamese restaurant below the bookshop. She adored Sophie and had been offering to babysit for months. Is this because of the bad men? Sophie asked quietly. Jordan knelt in front of his daughter. Yes, but everything is going to be okay. I promise. Sophie hugged him tightly. Then she turned and hugged Victoria too, surprising them both. Keep my dad safe, Sophie whispered. He pretends he's invincible, but he's not. Victoria's eyes glistened. I will. After breakfast, Jordan made arrangements with Mrs. Chun, who asked no questions but understood everything. By noon, Sophie was safely downstairs, happily making spring rolls and chattering about dolphins. Jordan and Victoria spent the afternoon preparing. He pulled equipment from places Victoria wouldn't have thought to look. A compact camera hidden in a hollowed-out book. Lockpicks wrapped in velvet inside a coffee can. Dark clothing that looked civilian but moved like tactical gear. You keep a lot of interesting things for a bookstore owner, Victoria observed. Old habits, Jordan said simply. As evening approached, they reviewed the plan one final time. Entry through the loading dock, avoid security cameras, photograph everything, exit clean. Simple in theory. Complicated in execution. You ready? Jordan asked. Victoria nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she pulled on the dark jacket he'd given her. Jordan noticed. Fear is normal. Fear keeps you sharp. Trust it. I'm trusting you, Victoria said. Something passed between them in that moment. Not quite partnership, not yet something more, but a connection forged in shared danger and mutual respect. They left through the back exit, moving quietly through rain-slicked alleys. The surveillance team was still watching the front of the bookshop, unaware their targets had already slipped away. Jordan moved through the city with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Victoria followed close, matching his pace, staying in his shadow. She'd spent years navigating boardrooms and hostile negotiations, but this was different. Physical danger had its own language, and Jordan spoke it fluently. The warehouse district was deserted after dark. Shipping containers stacked like metal monuments. Empty lots filled with industrial equipment. The smell of diesel and salt water from the port. Nearby, Jordan led them to a chain-link fence surrounding their target building. He produced a small tool from his pocket and had the lock open in seconds. They slipped inside. The warehouse. Interior was dark except for scattered work lights illuminating rows of equipment. Servers stacked on industrial shelving. Networking cables bundled and labeled. Computer terminals arranged in neat rows. It looked like someone was building a complete data center from scratch. Jordan and Victoria moved between the shadows, staying low, staying quiet. He photographed serial numbers, configuration notes, shipping manifests. Each image was potential evidence, another piece of the puzzle connecting Marcus to illegal activity. Victoria recognized some of the equipment. Enterprise-grade hardware, the kind used for serious computational tasks. Pattern recognition, encryption breaking, system penetration. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was preparation for a full-scale cyberattack. "This is bigger than I thought," Victoria whispered. With this setup, they could breach not just Apex, but any company using similar security protocols. Banks, hospitals, government agencies. Jordan continued photographing, his movements efficient and silent. How much damage could they do? Billions in theft. Infrastructure collapse. Identity theft affecting millions. Victoria's voice was tight. "Marcus isn't just trying to take over my company. He's building the capability to hold entire industries hostage." A door opened somewhere in the warehouse. Jordan immediately pulled Victoria behind a stack of shipping crates, his hand over her mouth to keep her silent. Footsteps approached, accompanied by voices. "The second shipment arrives Thursday," a man said. "Once we have the quantum processors installed, we can begin penetration testing." "And the biometric override?" Another voice, older, with an accent Victoria couldn't place. "We're still working on that. Caldwell's security is tighter than expected. But our field team is applying pressure. She make a mistake eventually." Jordan's hand tensed against Victoria's shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and controlled, while her own hammered against her ribs. The footsteps passed within feet of their hiding spot. Victoria held her breath, counting seconds. Finally, the voices faded as the men moved to the far end of the warehouse. Jordan carefully released her and gestured toward the exit. Time to leave. They retraced their steps, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid any sound. Jordan reached the side door first and checked the exterior. Clear. They slipped out into the night air. And Victoria finally allowed herself to breathe normally. But as they moved toward the fence, lights suddenly blazed to life around the perimeter. Spotlights flooded the yard. An alarm began to wail. "Run," Jordan said. They sprinted toward the fence, but figures emerged from between the shipping containers. 4 men, moving to cut off their escape. These weren't the surveillance team from earlier. These were security, armed and trained. These were security, armed and trained. Victoria was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 empty coffee cups beside her. She'd changed out of her soaked clothes into a spare shirt and sweatpants Jordan had left outside her door. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without the corporate armor of expensive clothes and perfect makeup, she looked younger. More human. "You're up early," Jordan said. "Couldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline." She gestured at her laptop. "I've been reviewing security footage from Apex, trying to identify when they started surveilling me." Jordan poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "Find anything?" 3 weeks. They've been following me for 3 weeks. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. Different teams, rotating schedules, but always present. I thought I was being paranoid. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. Jordan studied the footage over her shoulder. Professional work. The kind that costs serious money. Your former partner has deep pockets, Jordan observed. Marcus has investors now. People who see Apex as an acquisition target worth whatever it takes. Victoria closed the laptop. I've been thinking about what you said last night. About going on offense. What exactly did you have in mind? Jordan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he'd received at 2 in the morning. A warehouse in the industrial district south of downtown. Nondescript, but the metadata attached to the image told a different story. This building is leased by a shell company that traces back to one of Marcus's known associates. According to my source, there's a shipment arriving tonight. High-value cargo, heavy security. Victoria's eyes sharpened. What kind of cargo? Electronic equipment. Specialized servers, networking hardware. The kind of infrastructure you'd need if you were planning to clone an existing security system. Understanding dawned on Victoria's face. They're building a duplicate of Apex's network. If they can mirror our systems, they could run penetration tests, find vulnerabilities, exploit them before we even know there's a breach. That's my guess. We need to stop that shipment. Jordan shook his head. We need to document it. Get evidence that ties Marcus directly to corporate espionage. Right now, it's all circumstantial. You need proof. Victoria leaned back, processing. You want to surveil the warehouse. I want to get inside, Jordan corrected. Photograph the equipment, identify the buyers, trace the money. Build a case that even Marcus's lawyers can't dismiss. That's illegal entry. Breaking and entering. Only if we get caught. Victoria stared at him. You're serious. You said you needed proof. This is how we get it. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing options. Everything about this went against her instinct for careful legal approaches. But careful and legal had gotten her cornered in an alley, running for her life. I'm coming with you, Victoria said. No, too dangerous. It's my company. My fight. Jordan's jaw tightened. You're the target. If something goes wrong, you being there makes everything worse. And if something goes wrong, you being there alone means no one knows what happened to you. Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by letting other people take all the risks. We do this together or not at all. They stared at each other across the small kitchen table. Jordan recognized that look. The same stubborn determination he'd seen in operators who refused to be left behind on missions. The kind of person who'd rather die fighting than live wondering what if. He exhaled slowly. Fine, but you follow my lead. No arguments, no hesitation. If I say run, you run. Agreed? Agreed. Sophie emerged from Jordan's bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She looked at the two of them sitting close together over coffee and maps, and smiled sleepily. Are you planning an adventure? She asked. Jordan exchanged a glance with Victoria. Something like that, sweetheart. Can I come? Not this time. But I need you to do something very important for me. Sophie straightened, suddenly serious. What? Mrs. Chun downstairs has been asking about having you over for dumplings. I'm going to call her and arrange for you to spend the evening there. Can you be on your best behavior? Sophie nodded solemnly. Mrs. Chun was the elderly woman who ran the Vietnamese restaurant below the bookshop. She adored Sophie and had been offering to babysit for months. Is this because of the bad men? Sophie asked quietly. Jordan knelt in front of his daughter. Yes, but everything is going to be okay. I promise. Sophie hugged him tightly. Then she turned and hugged Victoria too, surprising them both. Keep my dad safe, Sophie whispered. He pretends he's invincible, but he's not. Victoria's eyes glistened. I will. After breakfast, Jordan made arrangements with Mrs. Chun, who asked no questions but understood everything. By noon, Sophie was safely downstairs, happily making spring rolls and chattering about dolphins. Jordan and Victoria spent the afternoon preparing. He pulled equipment from places Victoria wouldn't have thought to look. A compact camera hidden in a hollowed-out book. Lockpicks wrapped in velvet inside a coffee can. Dark clothing that looked civilian but moved like tactical gear. "You keep a lot of interesting things for a bookstore owner," Victoria observed. "Old habits," Jordan said simply. As evening approached, they reviewed the plan one final time. Entry through the loading dock, avoid security cameras, photograph everything, exit clean. Simple in theory, complicated in execution. "You ready?" Jordan asked. Victoria nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she pulled on the dark jacket he'd given her. Jordan noticed. "Fear is normal. Fear keeps you sharp. Trust it." "I'm trusting you," Victoria said. Something passed between them in that moment. Not quite partnership, not yet something more, but a connection forged in shared danger and mutual respect. They left through the back exit, moving quietly through rain-slicked alleys. The surveillance team was still watching the front of the bookshop, unaware their targets had already slipped away. Jordan moved through the city with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Victoria followed close, matching his pace, staying in his shadow. She'd spent years navigating boardrooms and hostile negotiations, but this was different. Physical danger had its own language, and Jordan spoke it fluently. The warehouse district was deserted after dark. Shipping containers stacked like metal monuments. Empty lots filled with industrial equipment. The smell of diesel and salt water from the port. Nearby, Jordan led them to a chain-link fence surrounding their target building. He produced a small tool from his pocket and had the lock open in seconds. They slipped inside. The warehouse. Interior was dark except for scattered work lights illuminating rows of equipment. Servers stacked on industrial shelving. Networking cables bundled and labeled. Computer terminals arranged in neat rows. It looked like someone was building a complete data center from scratch. Jordan and Victoria moved between the shadows, staying low, staying quiet. He photographed serial numbers, configuration notes, shipping manifests. Each image was potential evidence, another piece of the puzzle connecting Marcus to illegal activity. Victoria recognized some of the equipment. Enterprise-grade hardware, the kind used for serious computational tasks. Pattern recognition, encryption breaking, system penetration. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was preparation for a full-scale cyber attack. "This is bigger than I thought," Victoria whispered. With this setup, they could breach not just Apex, but any company using similar security protocols. Banks, hospitals, government agencies. Jordan continued photographing, his movements efficient and silent. How much damage could they do? Billions in theft. Infrastructure collapse. Identity theft affecting millions. Victoria's voice was tight. "Marcus isn't just trying to take over my company. He's building the capability to hold entire industries hostage." A door opened somewhere in the warehouse. Jordan immediately pulled Victoria behind a stack of shipping crates, his hand over her mouth to keep her silent. Footsteps approached, accompanied by voices. "The second shipment arrives Thursday," a man said. "Once we have the quantum processors installed, we can begin penetration testing." "And the biometric override?" Another voice, older, with an accent Victoria couldn't place. "We're still working on that. Caldwell's security is tighter than expected. But our field team is applying pressure. She make a mistake eventually." Jordan's hand tensed against Victoria's shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and controlled, while her own hammered against her ribs. The footsteps passed within feet of their hiding spot. Victoria held her breath, counting seconds. Finally, the voices faded as the men moved to the far end of the warehouse. Jordan carefully released her and gestured toward the exit. Time to leave. They retraced their steps, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid any sound. Jordan reached the side door first and checked the exterior. Clear. They slipped out into the night air. And Victoria finally allowed herself to breathe normally. But as they moved toward the fence, lights suddenly blazed to life around the perimeter. Spotlights flooded the yard. An alarm began to wail. "Run," Jordan said. They sprinted toward the fence, but figures emerged from between the shipping containers. 4 men, moving to cut off their escape. These weren't the surveillance team from earlier. These were security, armed and trained. These were security, armed and trained. They had 30 minutes before insertion. Sarah was checking equipment, laying out gear with practiced efficiency. Jordan stood at the window, staring at the rain-soaked city, his jaw tight with controlled tension. Victoria approached quietly. "You should know something before we do this." Jordan turned. "Marcus knows about your past," Victoria said. "I saw a file on his desk during a meeting 6 months ago. Before any of this started. Your name, your service record, even photos of Sophie. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Thought it was just corporate due diligence on neighborhood businesses." Jordan's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched. "He's been planning this for months. He targets people's weaknesses, studies them, waits for the perfect moment to exploit them." Victoria's voice dropped. "I should have warned you. Should have said something when I first came into your shop. But I didn't connect the dots until tonight. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know what you're walking into. Marcus doesn't just want Sophie as leverage. He wants to break you. To prove that even someone with your skills can be controlled, manipulated, destroyed." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. "When I left private security, I made a promise to myself. No more violence. No more putting myself in situations where I had to choose between someone's life and mission objectives. I wanted to be different for Sophie. Better." "You are better," Victoria said. "Am I?" "Because right now, I'm planning to walk into a building and hurt people. Maybe kill them. All the things I swore I'd left behind." Victoria moved closer. "You're doing it for your daughter. That's not the same as doing it for money or ego or because someone ordered you to, isn't it? Violence is violence." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Intent matters. Motive matters. You're not the same man who walked away 3 years ago because you're not doing this for yourself." Jordan looked at her, really looked, and saw not judgment, but understanding. This woman who'd built an empire, who could have walked away rich and safe, had chosen to stand and fight because some things mattered more than self-preservation. "Why are you here?" he asked. "You could give them the key, disappear, start over somewhere else. Why risk everything?" Victoria's smile was sad. "Because I spent 7 years building something I believed in. Something that could protect people, make the world safer. And I've spent the last 6 months watching Marcus try to twist that into a weapon. If I run now, if I give up, then everything I built becomes everything I fought against. Even if it costs you everything. Especially then." She paused. "My father used to say that character isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when the cost is more than you can afford, and you do it anyway." Jordan felt something shift in his chest. He'd been alone for so long, carrying burdens he thought no one else could understand. But Victoria understood. Maybe not the specific details of his past, but the weight of it. The cost of choosing principle over pragmatism. Sarah cleared her throat. "Hate to interrupt the moment, but we're on the clock." Jordan nodded. He moved to the table where Sarah had laid out equipment. Body armor, communication devices, flashlights, medical supplies. And weapons. 2 handguns, cleaned and loaded. Jordan stared at them. He hadn't held a gun in 3 years. "You don't have to," Sarah said quietly. "I can handle the heavy work." No, Jordan said. He picked up one of the weapons, checked the magazine, chambered around. The movements were automatic, muscle memory from another life. If Sophie's in danger, I'm not going in half-ready. Victoria watched him transform. The gentle bookstore owner disappearing, replaced by someone harder. Someone capable of terrible things in service of protection. Are you scared? She asked. Jordan looked at her. Terrified. But not of them. I'm scared I'll fail her. That I won't be fast enough or smart enough, and she'll pay the price for my limitations. Then we make sure that doesn't happen, Victoria said. She picked up the second weapon, her hands awkward around it. Teach me. Jordan blinked. You've never handled a gun? I've spent my career building digital security. This is outside my expertise. Sarah moved forward. We don't have time for proper training. Then teach me enough to not be a liability, Victoria insisted. I'm not staying behind while you two risk everything. Show me how to point and shoot. That's all I need. Jordan exchanged a glance with Sarah, who shrugged. Her funeral. For the next 10 minutes, Jordan gave Victoria a crash course in basic firearm safety and operation. How to hold it, how to aim, how to manage recoil. She was a quick study, her analytical mind breaking down the mechanics into understandable components. Remember, Jordan said, you don't draw unless you're prepared to fire. You don't fire unless you're prepared to kill. There's no middle ground. Victoria nodded, her face pale but determined. Sarah checked her watch. Time to move. They gathered their equipment and headed for the door. As they descended the stairs, Jordan paused at Mrs. Chun's restaurant. The old woman appeared in the doorway, her face creased with worry. Bring her home safe, Mrs. Chun said. I will, Jordan promised. In the alley, Sarah had parked a nondescript van. They climbed in, and she pulled into traffic, keeping to side streets and avoiding main arteries where surveillance might catch them. Victoria sat in the back, checking her phone compulsively. No new messages. No updates. Just the silence of a ticking clock counting down to violence. Jordan sat beside her, his face composed but his leg bouncing slightly. A nervous tell Victoria hadn't seen before. She reached over and placed her hand on his knee. He looked at her, surprised. We're going to get her back, Victoria said. Jordan nodded. But both of them knew that promise was one they might not be able to keep. The maritime building loomed against the night sky, a relic of Seattle's industrial past now abandoned and forgotten. Broken windows stared like empty eyes. Graffiti covered the lower walls. The smell of salt water and rust hung heavy in the air. Sarah parked 3 blocks away. They approached on foot, using shadows and abandoned vehicles for cover. Jordan moved with practiced silence, every sense alert. Sarah flanked right, her movements equally professional. Victoria stayed between them, doing her best to match their quiet efficiency. They reached the building's perimeter. Jordan signaled for them to hold position while he scouted the exterior. 2 guards at the main entrance, visible and obvious. Meant to be seen. Which meant the real security was elsewhere. He circled the building, staying low, cataloging positions. 3 more guards at the loading dock. 1 patrolling the roof. At least 7 hostiles, probably more inside. Jordan returned to Sarah and Victoria. Using hand signals, he communicated what he'd seen. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. Victoria watched, feeling useless, but trying to absorb everything. We go in through the basement access on the north side, Jordan whispered. Sarah, you draw attention at the loading dock. Make them think you're the main assault. Victoria and I slip in through the basement, locate Sophie, and extract. And if it goes wrong? Sarah asked. Then we improvise. Sarah smiled grimly. My favorite plan. They moved into position. Sarah disappeared toward the loading dock, carrying enough equipment to look like a one-woman army. Jordan and Victoria approached the basement access, A rusted door half hidden by debris. Jordan picked the lock in seconds. The door opened with a quiet groan. They slipped inside, closing it behind them. The basement was dark, lit only by emergency lights that cast everything in sickly green. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The floor was concrete, cold and damp. Jordan led the way, weapon up, checking corners. Victoria stayed close, her own gun feeling heavy and alien in her hands. They reached a stairwell. Jordan paused, listening. Voices above. At least 3 men, maybe more. Then faintly, a sound that made Jordan's heart clench. A child crying, "Sophie." He moved faster now, caution balanced against desperate need. Up the stairs, into a corridor lined with old offices. The voices were clearer now, coming from a room at the end of the hall. Jordan approached the door, which stood slightly ajar. He peered through the gap. Sophie sat in a chair in the center of the room, her hands zip-tied in front of her. Tears streaked her face, but she wasn't hysterical. She was scared but trying to be brave, just like he'd taught her. 3 men stood around her. One was the same man who'd entered the bookshop yesterday. The others were unfamiliar. And in the corner, watching with cold satisfaction, stood Marcus Devereaux. Jordan had seen photos, but in person, Marcus was smaller than expected. Mid-40s, expensive suit, thinning hair. He looked like 1,000 other tech executives. Nothing remarkable except the cruelty in his eyes. The problem with leverage, Marcus was saying, is that it only works if the other party believes you'll follow through. Miss Caldwell needs to understand that I'm serious. You want me to hurt the kid? One of the men asked. Just enough to make the point. A broken finger should suffice. Jordan's vision went red. Every tactical consideration vanished, replaced by pure protective rage. Victoria grabbed his arm, sensing he was about to do something reckless. She pulled him back from the door and looked him in the eyes. "Wait," she mouthed. "Smart, remember?" Jordan forced himself to breathe. She was right. Rushing in would get Sophie hurt or worse. Outside, an explosion rocked the building. Sarah's distraction. Right on time. Sarah's distraction. Right on time. The men in the room reacted immediately, weapons drawn, moving toward the sound. Marcus shouted orders, his composure finally cracking. "Watch the girl," he barked at one guard, then hurried out with the others. Now there was only one man between Jordan and his daughter. Jordan moved. He burst through the door, covered the distance in 3 strides, and was on the guard before he could react. A quick strike to the throat, followed by a knee to the solar plexus. The guard dropped, unconscious. "Daddy!" Sophie cried. Jordan cut her zip ties with a knife from his belt and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe now." Victoria stood guard at the door, weapon raised, watching the corridor. "We need to move. They'll be back any second." Jordan lifted Sophie. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. They moved quickly back toward the basement stairs, but voices echoed from below. The route they'd come in was compromised. "This way," Victoria said, leading them down a different corridor. She'd studied the building plans during their preparation, memorizing alternate routes. They emerged on the 2nd floor, near a fire escape. Jordan kicked open the rusty door, and they climbed down into the alley. But Marcus was waiting. He stood with 2 guards, blocking their path. In his hand was a small device, and Victoria recognized it immediately. A signal jammer. The same kind his men had used in the alley the first night. "Predictable," Marcus said. "I knew you'd use the fire escape. Old buildings only have so many exits." Jordan set Sophie down behind him, placing himself between her and the threat. Victoria moved to his side, her weapon raised despite her shaking hands. "It's over, Marcus," Victoria said. "I have evidence of everything. The warehouse, the equipment, the illegal surveillance. You're finished." Marcus smiled. Evidence that you obtained through breaking and entering. That will be thrown out in any court. Meanwhile, I have witnesses who'll testify that you hired thugs to attack my legitimate business operations. Who's the jury going to believe? The unstable CEO who's been acting paranoid for months? Or the respected businessman trying to save a company from its founder's mental breakdown? You tried to kidnap my daughter, Jordan said, his voice deadly quiet. Did I? Or did she simply wander off and you assumed the worst? There's no proof I was involved. These men? Marcus gestured at his guards. Private security protecting my property from intruders. Everything I've done has been carefully legal. Victoria felt despair rising. He was right. Marcus had covered every angle, built in deniability, made sure any evidence could be explained away. But then Sophie spoke, her voice small but clear. I recorded him. Everyone turned to look at her. She pulled a small device from her pocket. A voice recorder, the kind Jordan had given her for school projects. When the bad man was talking about hurting me, I pressed record, Sophie said. Like you taught me, Daddy, document everything. Marcus's face went pale. Sophie pressed play. Marcus's voice came through tinny but clear. Discussing leverage, talking about breaking a child's finger. Giving orders that no lawyer could explain away. Jordan looked at his daughter with a mix of pride and heartbreak. 8 years old, terrified, and she'd still fought to gather evidence. You're under arrest, a new voice said. Police emerged from the shadows. Led by a detective Jordan recognized from his old security days. Sarah must have called them in, timed their arrival perfectly. Marcus's guards dropped their weapons immediately. But Marcus himself just stared at Sophie with something like disbelief. A child, he said quietly. Undone by a child. No, Victoria said, stepping forward. Undone by underestimating people you thought were beneath you. That's always been your weakness, Marcus. You're so convinced of your own superiority that you can't see the value in others. As police led Marcus away, Victoria knelt in front of Sophie. You're very brave. And very smart. Sophie smiled through her tears. My dad says the best weapon is information. Your dad is a wise man. Jordan gathered his daughter back into his arms. She was safe. They were all safe. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won. 3 months later, autumn had painted Seattle in shades of gold and crimson. Chapter and verse remained a bookshop, but it had become something more. A gathering place. A community hub. The kind of establishment that anchored a neighborhood not through commerce, but through presence. Jordan stood behind the counter, helping a regular customer find a cookbook when the bell above the door chimed. Victoria entered, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing jeans and a simple sweater. No designer clothes, no corporate armor. Just herself. Thought you might need this, she said, handing him a cup. You're psychic now? I've learned your rhythms. She smiled. 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, you're always dragging. Sophie looked up from her homework at a corner table. Hi, Victoria. Hi, sweetness. How's the math coming? Terrible. Numbers are boring. Victoria laughed and sat beside her. Want me to show you a trick? As Victoria helped Sophie with fractions, Jordan watched them together. Over the past 3 months, Victoria had become a constant presence in their lives. Not intrusive, but present. She'd join them for dinners, help with homework, show up at Sophie's school play. She'd moved her operations back to Apex headquarters, but spent evenings in the bookshop, working on her laptop while Jordan managed the store. Marcus was awaiting trial on multiple charges. Corporate espionage, kidnapping, conspiracy. His legal team was skilled, but Sophie's recording had been damning. Even if he avoided prison through technicalities and high-priced lawyers, his reputation was destroyed. Apex's board had severed all ties, and investors had fled his various ventures. Victoria had taken full control of Apex again, but with changes. She'd restructured the company's priorities, focusing on ethical technology development and transparency. The quantum key technology remained proprietary, but under strict oversight to prevent weaponization. She'd also started a foundation, the Sophie Pierce Foundation for Child Safety and Education, funded by a significant portion of her personal wealth. It provided resources for children in dangerous situations, legal support for families facing corporate intimidation, and technology education for underserved communities. Sophie had been honored, but mostly confused about why a foundation needed her name. "I just pressed record," she'd said. As the afternoon faded to evening, Jordan closed the shop. The three of them walked to a nearby park, Sophie running ahead to chase pigeons while Jordan and Victoria followed at a leisurely pace. "I've been thinking," Victoria said. "Dangerous habit." She smiled. "I'm serious. About us. About what this is." Jordan's hand found hers. "And what is this?" "I don't know exactly. We haven't defined it. Haven't labeled it. We're just existing in this space between what we were and what we might become. Does it need a label?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "No, but I want you to know that I'm here. Not because you saved me, not out of obligation, but because when I'm with you and Sophie, I feel like I can breathe. Like I'm allowed to be something other than Victoria Caldwell, CEO. I can just be Victoria." Jordan stopped walking and turned to face her. "You've always been just Victoria to us." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "I know. That's why I'm staying." He kissed her then, soft and unhurried, while Sophie pretended not to notice from 20 feet away. That evening, they made dinner together in Jordan's small apartment. Spaghetti and vegetables, nothing fancy, but made with care and eaten with laughter. Sophie told elaborate stories about her school day, exaggerating everything for comedic effect. Victoria countered with equally absurd stories from board meetings. Jordan just listened, content to be surrounded by people he loved. After dinner, Sophie presented a new drawing. 3 figures standing together, holding hands. Above them, she'd written in careful letters, "My family." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Can I keep this?" "It's for your office," Sophie said seriously. "So when you're working, you remember we're waiting." "I'll treasure it," Victoria promised. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jordan and Victoria sat on the small balcony overlooking the street. Rain had started again, but they were sheltered under the overhang. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Coming back to this life? The danger, the violence?" Jordan considered the question. "I regret that Sophie was put in danger. I regret that my past created vulnerabilities that Marcus exploited. But the rest? No, because it brought you into our lives. And it reminded me that walking away from violence doesn't mean refusing to fight for what matters." "You've changed me," Victoria said. "Made me realize that power isn't just about control or wealth. It's about choosing when to be strong and when to be vulnerable. When to fight and when to forgive. Have you forgiven Marcus?" "No, but I've stopped letting him define my choices." "That's different." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain, listening to the city's nighttime symphony. Somewhere in the apartment, Sophie slept peacefully, surrounded by books and drawings and the security of being loved. Jordan had spent years trying to escape his past, to become someone different, someone better. But he'd learned that transformation wasn't about denial. It was about integration, taking the skills, the experiences, the damage, and using them to build something new. He wasn't just a veteran or a bookstore owner or a father. He was all of those things, and in the spaces between them, he'd found room for something unexpected. Love, partnership, hope. Victoria leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you, for what?" "For seeing me. For protecting me. For letting me be part of this." Jordan kissed the top of her head. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop hiding. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, preparing it for whatever came next. And in a small apartment above a bookshop, three people who'd found each other in the darkness began building something that looked remarkably like a future. Sophie had been right in her drawing. They were a family now. Not traditional, not expected, but real. Built not on biology or obligation, but on choice. On showing up. On staying when it would have been easier to leave. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Seattle and the bookshop opened its doors, they would face whatever came next together. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't wealth or technology or violence. Sometimes it's just the quiet certainty of knowing you're not alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.